Hello. In this video, I'll be sharing some tips and tricks that you can follow to score better marks in Physics 0625 Paper 6 Alternative Practicals. Purpose, we will be analyzing example candidate response issued by IGCSE in the year 2016, and also we'll be analyzing Summer 21 question paper variant 62. 2016, based on the following question paper that you can see on the screen, IGCSE has published example candidate response. And in the candidate's response, we can see a high achievers and a middle achiever and a low achievers paper for analysis. You'll be able to see examiner's comment and suggestions to improve your answer on this particular paper. So please note that in the year 2016, they had 5 questions in this question paper, whereas as per the updated model, we only have 4 per paper. Since the experimental techniques does not vary over time, we will be analyzing this one at the beginning. In this particular experiment to study the variation of extension with load, you can see that the general description of the table as it should be labeled always. For instance, the first column mentions the load and its unit is in Newton. Sometimes you will get questions to fill out these labels. Sometimes N will be missing or the extension part will be missing, where you have to put the appropriate units. As you know, spring obeys Hooke's law, so the load and extension should be directly proportional. For instance, you can see if the length that is recorded was 59 and 64 here, which means there is a difference of 5 millimeter. So the same is reflected in the extension column that you are filling out here. This is 64 to 69, so this has to be from 9 to 14. Then if they have again a 5 millimeter difference, then the extension column on the right should also have the same amount of difference. Now here it is having a difference of 4 millimeters, so this should also have 4 millimeter. For this, the candidate got 1 mark each. Now explain briefly one precaution that you would take in order to obtain reliable readings. And the student did not get full mark here. The reason being the suggestion or precaution that is mentioned by the student is to wait for the spring to go back to its original length. And here we are trying to find the extension when load increases. So this will completely contradict the entire purpose of the experiment. So the candidate was not awarded mark for this question. Now, in every single one of these question papers, you will come across a question where you have to plot the graph, which will be usually for 3 to 4 marks. On the table that we have seen earlier, now the student has to plot a graph. Now I'll display question paper summer 21 variant 62. Now here in this particular question, you can see a similar pattern. Now this also has come for 4 mark. Here also a table is given, and I want you to look at the marking scheme specifically. You can see that 1 mark is given for labeling the axis correctly with the unit. Okay, so in this particular question where they have to plot L against V, and they will directly give you what is to be plotted on which axis. For instance, here in this particular question, you should plot V, I guess it is voltage, along y-axis and L along x-axis. Now, after labeling these axes, and everything is given to you guys actually here, what is to be there on y-axis and what is its unit, what is to be there on x-axis, what is its unit. So as in easier, you can also see a similar pattern. First, we will write what is taken along x-axis, then its unit, what is taken along y-axis, then its unit. That is your 1 mark. The next mark is for choosing the suitable scale. For that, you have to look at this table carefully. Here you can see that length is increasing in the interval of like 20 units. Okay, so it can be like 10, can be 20, but do not choose a smaller scale for this, for which your points will be too far apart. So choose an appropriate scale, and for choosing a scale that makes sense, you will be awarded 1 mark. Now the third point is that all plots should be correct to 1/2 of a small square. So you can see in this graph, there are squares having a dimension 1 millimeter. So for each of these points that you are trying to plot here, it should be correct to 1/2 of a small square. Okay. Now the last point is where student usually loses mark. For instance, look at this candidate's response here. Label done, scale properly chosen, then all the points are marked, everything looks fine, but the student was awarded only 3 marks, as you can. The reason is that you can see these, this is not a single straight line. It is as if these 2 points are connected using a straight line. This is connected using another. This is connected using another. Okay. And for heaven's sake, use a sharpened pencil and use scale. Now, it is not necessary for all the points to be on the straight, because this is not a game to connect the dots and form a shape. This is to find the best fit according to the distribution of these points, which will happen to be a straight line. So you have to draw a line in such a way that as many points as you can should be on this straight line. Now let us analyze summer 21 question paper 62, which is a very recent one. So the pattern will be almost. In the first question, you have to make an estimate of the volume based on the reference value that is given, 250 centimeter cube. So until here, the volume of this beaker that you have taken is 250 centimeter cube. So when it is completely filled, you have to guess what the volume is going to be. And you can see that, like, if we divide this like almost equally by 4 parts, each of these smaller division will be like 50 centimeter cube. So if your answer lies somewhere between 300 to 330 or something, that will be an ideal answer. And as per the key, you will be able to see that anywhere between 280 to 350 centimeter cube can be awarded 1 mark. Next question, circumference is given and you are asked to find a method to find the circumference using a string. So all of you know the method, I know for sure. You will basically wind the string that is given to you on the container. The key point is that it should be wound several times. Now, if you want to find the circumference, you are basically finding the average circumference. So you measure the total length, then you will divide it by the number of turns. So do not simply write like you will make one loop and measure the length, that will give you circumference. In the next question, height is given and c is already given, and you are asked to do a calculation based on the equation that is given. Seemingly harmless question, but uh, many of the times you will not get mark on this because you did not take account of the number of significant figures. So the idea of this question is not to test your ability to just put random numbers in calculator and choose the appropriate operator that is directly given in the question. So what is the whole point of this question? This is to check whether a student knows the rules involving the calculation with significant figures. Now, as you can see, the H here has two significant figure. Also note one more thing. Here, although the measurement is 9 centimeter, they have expressed it as 9.0 centimeter, which you should also follow. The reason being, this 0.0 here indicates that this length was measured using an apparatus that has a least count 0.1 centimeter accuracy. So for this purpose, they might have used a meter scale, and that is why it is expressed as 9.0 centimeter, although the value is 9 centimeter. So H is 9.0 centimeter. It has two significant figure. C has 21.3 significant figure. So the question is, how many significant figure should be there in this final answer? When you plug these numbers into calculator, you may, I don't know, in this particular case, you may probably get numbers with like more number of significant figures. So you have to round it off to either 2 or 3 significant figure. Now, the marking scheme gives you a leniency to choose between 2 or 3. What should be the appropriate number of significant figure in your final answer involving numbers, calculation of numbers with different number of significant figure? Let's say you are dividing two numbers and A is like 2.1, which has two significant figure, and B is like 4.135, something like this. Now here it has four significant figure, and you are going to divide these two numbers. The general rule is that the final answer should have the same number of significant figure as that of the number with the lowest number of significant figure, which here is 2.1, which has two significant figures. So you should round off your final answer into two significant figures. Now let's say in a particular question to find, let's say, the heat transfer, 200 gram is given as the mass, and the specific heat capacity, it is expressed in joules per kilogram. Okay, now let's say that is like 4.2 or something like that. So here the number of significant figure in this mass is not 1, it is actually 3. Why? Because when you convert into kilogram, it will be 0.200. This is a measured value, not an approximated value. So all these numbers are significant. 0.200 kilogram. So it has three significant figures. So based on which you have to choose the number of significant figure in your final calculation. In the next question, you are asked to find what is the mass of B. Now, a reading is clearly shown here, but the key point is that in the question it specify it should be to nearest gram. So, in decimal numbers, like let's say 208 point, let's say if it is 6. If it is anything greater than 5, you should add 1 to the last digit, so it will become 209. If it is anything less than 5, then you should discard this, so it will become 208. So what happens if it is exactly 5, that is 208.5? The general rule is that you should look the number that is before 5. If it is odd, you raise by 1. If it is even, you can drop this 5. Now another mass is given, and in the next one you should subtract this. So if you had actually expressed it as 208.3, then your final answer will have one more decimal place. If you have approximated it as 208, then you should simply subtract it here. Now according to which you have to express your answer here. Now why that is required is, as I told you, now in the next question you can see rho is to be calculated by dividing mass with volume, and in the mass, if you are expressing it like with decimals, not as to nearest gram, then your number will have most likely 4 significant figures. And volume, I think it was somewhere around, yeah, in this calculation, whatever volume that you got, you have to substitute it over here. Only you will be able to calculate the value of density. Now here the unit is not given, unlike these questions where unit is given. So if unit is not given, for the out of this 2 mark, 1 mark will be for the unit. Okay, so there are two options in which you can express density, either as gram per centimeter cube or kilogram per meter cube. Ideally, go with SI unit system. Now, if we are going with SI unit system, you have to take care of conversions properly. For instance, let's say if you are simply dividing by taking that 208, which was expressed in grams, remember, and by dividing it with volume, which will be ideally in centimeter cube. So if you are doing like that, your final answer will be somewhere like this. Now, if you're converting into kilogram, you should convert not only gram to kilogram, you should also convert the centimeter to meter as well. So these decimal places, as you can see, will be varied. And choose the appropriate unit, of course. In the next question, we are supposed to draw a diagram of the measuring cylinder and show the line of sight of student. Now, I want to connect it to a different question as well. Like you have a measuring cylinder, and values are written over here like this. And you fill some liquid in it, let's say water. Now, water has a specialty. Its adhesive properties are more than its cohesive property. So it will form a meniscus that looks like this, unlike mercury, which forms a meniscus like this. Now, the question is, which value should we measure as volume? Should we go for the upper one or the lower one? Where water is concerned, we should always look at the lower meniscus. Okay. And without any parallax error, you have to measure the appropriate reading over here. Now, imagine, let's say your values are here and your final reading is here. Now, if you are drawing your eye like this, then you will lose this mark. The key idea is that you should not have any parallax error. For that, the measurement should be made perpendicular to this tube or parallel to these values. So your line of sight should be visible like this. Your eye should be shown something like this. Now, in the second question, you are given a set of instructions to follow to draw a ray diagram. So you just have to follow it blindly. I'm just reiterating the things that you have learned in lower grades in math. Now, if you want to draw a normal or perpendicular that goes through the center, how should you draw it? You take a line, you take a length in compass that is more than half of this line, make an arc from here, arc from here, arc from here, then arc here, and connect it. You will be able to draw a perpendicular bisector. These are geometric techniques that you should be aware of. Now, after that, you are supposed to label certain points according to your diagram. Use your common sense. In this part, you are supposed to draw a line of 7 centimeter, making an angle of incidence 20 degree. Now here, this is 20 degree. Remember, we are still in alternative practical paper. So the 20 degree should be expressed along with the error that you can get from here. And this is protractor that you're using, and all the protractors that you have seen has a least count of 1 degree, meaning you cannot measure anything lower than this. So you can make an error either like +1 or -1 to this 20. So appropriate labeling should be 20 plus or minus 1 degree. Now in part C, this is a raised ray experiment, which we follow mostly in optics. So in these particular experiments, we use thumb pins and protractors and a scale to see the path of ray in reflection as well as refraction. Okay, so let's say, to give one example, this is a mirror and this is a normal, and let's say I draw some line like this, and I have to place two thumb pins here. Okay, now the idea is that I will be placing a thumb pin here while looking from here in such a way that because of this pin, I will not be able to see this or this. So I'll place here, and I will be placing one more in such a way that I will not be able to see either three of these. So after that, I will connect these, and this will be the proposed path of reflected light. Why so? Because you're basically looking at the reflection of these pins along this straight line path of light, ray of light. Now the question is, in these type of experiments, what should be the ideal distance between these two thumb pins that you can follow? Now these pins should not be too close to each other. If you do it like that, that obviously the second pin will be completely covered or hindered by the pin in front of it. So that will destroy the purpose of the experiment. So ideally, as per the key, it can anywhere be between 5 to 15 centimeter. So you are suggesting a method here. In the D part, you should measure A and B as per the instruction that is given, and again calculate A divided by. So for this also, you have to take account of the uncertainty in the measurement or the error that you can make. And since you are using a meter scale, even if it is like 1.8 centimeter, you are bound to make an error between uh, 1.9 and 1.7. The reason being, let's say you want to find the length of this using a meter scale. Okay. And let's say this end stays somewhere between this particular line and this particular line. Either you have to approximate it to the previous value or the next value as per your best judgment. Either way, you are making some error because your experimental setup or experimental apparatus was not good enough. And that should be expressed like along with its uncertainty. So even if it is 1.8, it should be 1.8 plus or minus 0.1. If it is 3.5, it should be 3.5 plus or minus 0.1 centimeter. Okay. If both are correct only, you will get 1 mark here. Here A value, B value is recorded and you are supposed to calculate. And in here also you have to take account of the number of significant figures. Now you basically found out A by B values using two different methods in here. Okay. Now this is a widely asked question. State and explain whether two values of A and B can be considered to be equal in this experiment. The answer is either yes or no, depending upon the values that you have got. So how do we state and explain in such a way that we will be able to get this full mark for this particular question? So the sentence that you should mug up is this: values are either within the limit of experimental accuracy, or the term that you can use here is error, or uncertainty. Okay, or they are very close to each other. Sometimes this is not correct. So either way, you have to express it according to the situation. Okay, the keywords that you should use is not going to change. Either the values are within the experimental accuracy, or they are very close, or they are not close or very far apart. So these things that you have to mention. Now within 5% or 10% of each other. Uh, when you express it in percentage error, which you are not as of now probably not familiar of, you have to find the percentage error which you will be seeing for the first time probably in AS level. So better you stick on with these two. Now to suggest or make an improvement in this particular experiment, you're supposed to make a point here. Now that should be aligned with the objective of this particular experiment. And you can choose anything from difficulty in lining pins or size of holes, thickness of lines, thickness of mirror. All these points can contribute to an error or is having an area of improvement. Now, when you look at the ECR for this particular question, this is a question involving balancing a bar on a pivot using two different masses. Okay. Now, a candidate has written a suggestion to improve the reliability of this experiment like this. It's a solid object instead of a modeling clay. Fine, looks fine. Make sure object P and Q does not cover lines and number of the ruler. Okay, that's okay, but does it actually align with the objective of the experiment? Now, the point that you should address here is that uh, since we are trying to balance two masses, exact balance has not been addressed. But the candidate tries about precaution rather than these methods to improve the reliability. So for which the mark is not awarded. When you look at it without actually checking the question, the points that candidate made sounds valid, or it does not have any error in it technically. But since we are trying to improve the reliability of the experiment, you should focus on the objective of the experiment itself. Third question has been addressed already involving the graphs. The graph part of this question is already been discussed. So here, first you have to mention the reading in voltmeter and ammeter. And again here, the mark will be reduced if you don't incorporate the least count of this particular apparatus. For instance, you can see this is voltmeter, and uh, this has 5 division between 0 and 1. So each of these divisions are 0.2 volt. Okay. Now here there is 10 division between 0 and 0.02. So each of these divisions should be 0.02 ampere. So since the least count of this, you are not supposed to hear, let's say, since the least count of these apparatus are fixed, imagine, let's say, if the line was somewhere like this. Okay. Imagine, let's say the line was somewhere over here, goes through exactly the mid. Okay. Now, in this particular scenario, which value should I take? This value is 2, this is like 2.2. Now, being a responsible student, you may try to write voltage reading as 2.1 volt. Seems to be correct, right? But you will not get marked for this because the least count of this apparatus is 0.2. It can either be 2, it can either be 2.2, never 2.1, because this value can never be measured using the apparatus that is given to you guys. The same applies here for current reading. Don't guess, don't approximate, write whatever you see. Subpart involves division of two values with different number of significant figure. So you have to again follow the rules of significant figures here. And as you can notice here and in here, and also in here, the units are not given. So here it should be volt, it should be ampere, it should be ohm. So the mark is there for unit as well, and which can be clearly seen in marking scheme. The graph we already did. So after drawing the graph, we come across another question where we use the resistance that was calculated before, and based on that resistance value, you're supposed to calculate the length of wire corresponding to that. So in this graph, we originally plotted L along x-axis and V along y-axis. And in the previous question, we saw some value of V, some value of I, and correspondingly some value of R. So you have the value of V that gives you this particular resistance. So you look for this value on y-axis and you extend it. Okay, let's say you got some straight line like this. You extend it, it meets the straight line somewhere over here. You draw a straight line straight downwards, and the value that you get from here on x-axis will be the value that you're looking for. Okay. Again, I want to emphasize that do not focus on this particular question. Focus on the experimental techniques that you have come across. Now, this is where you tend to make some mistake, but there are easy ways to avoid these mistakes so that you will be able to score full 7 mark for this particular experiment. We'll analyze easier for this particular question. Now, the ideal way of doing this question or approaching this question is to underline the keywords. Okay, so here the student is investigating how resistance of a wire depends upon length of the wire. Okay, so here we are trying to find some relation between R and L. We are given a set of apparatus, and here you can see that the candidate has correctly identified the keyword and has underlined it, which you should also follow. The purpose of doing that is because sometimes you may drift off and forget about what we are trying to find the relation between. Now they have given you a set of instruction. You should draw a diagram of the circuit, and you should determine the resistance of each wire. Then explain briefly how you would carry out the investigation, suitable wires, suitable lengths of wires, and this is important. State the key variables that you would control. In every experiment, there will be 3 set of variables. First is independent variable. Then you have dependent variable, and you have control variable. Control variable is something that you fix throughout in a particular experiment. For instance, in this particular experiment, let's say you have some method to set the room temperature not change or set it to be constant, or let's say the supply is fixed at a certain voltage. You are not going to change it throughout the entire experiment. So these are control variables that you keep constant throughout the experiment. You are not supposed to change that. Now, independent variable is something that you are changing. Let's say when you are changing length and you are trying to find a resistance, the independent variable is length and the dependent variable is resistance. Now, in all question 4, the variable that you can change is not like unique. You can find a 2 to 3 set of variable which will yield you the same objective of this particular experiment. So you have to be so you have to apply your common sense there. Now, after doing so, after suggesting it, you have to draw a table, and in the table you should give suitable column heading. So again, in column heading, you should mention the quantity along with its unit. Okay. Now, if you are changing here like 4 to 5 lengths, um, in the question they asked you to suggest some length, so you can name it like 20 centimeter, 30 centimeter, like that, and the corresponding value of resistance. Let's see how the student has done it. So length of resistance wire is noted down here, and current value and voltage value, and using this current and voltage, how to find resistance. So these kind of things vary from question to question. To S21, question paper 62. In this particular question, it's a whole different question involving springs and different loads. Now, how these marks are assigned to you is what you need to be careful about. Now, this is an entirely different question involving mass and loads. So here, this should work technically as a checklist for you guys. Okay, I'll show you how it is evaluated. For instance, let's say you have to draw a diagram of the setup. Okay, have you drawn a diagram? Has the apparatus and everything is properly shown? You get 1 mark from here. Write a list of suitable metals. Have you written it? You get 1 mark here. Explain briefly how to carry out the investigation. Have you written methods? You get again 1 mark here. Write the method, you have to mention what are you changing and how are you changing, and also finally what are you recording, what are you taking the readings of. Now obviously this is to find relation between two quantities, so one of which you are going to change, which is your independent variable, and you will be finding out the dependent variable which you are actually recording. So here, this calculation, this method involves repetition by changing your independent variable. Now they ask you to state the key variables that you keep constant, which is your control variables. So identify one control variable, write it. As I told you, this is not a unique answer. And you can see we are given a set of like 5 to 6 options to choose from. Okay, so any of this which you keep constant can be written and will be awarded mark, provided it should be suitable to the experiment and it makes sense with the objective of the experiment. Now, as for the table, you should give the suitable column title and you should also mention the correct unit. Now, in every experiment, in order to reach a conclusion, you have to analyze your data. Now, usually we analyze data by plotting graphs between the two variables that you have chosen. Okay. Now, let's say for in this particular case, you're plotting a graph of extension against load. Okay. Now, x-axis and y-axis, ideally for graph, the independent variable that is taken is along x-axis and dependent variable will be along y-axis. Now, if you do not plot a graph, you have to compare it somehow. So another method of doing it is to compare, let's say, the extension for the same load. So you are trying with the same load and you are getting different extension and you are recording these, or you can simply plot a bar chart. So any of these methods involving the analysis of data, so any of these methods that involves the analysis of data, which goes hand in hand with the objective of this particular experiment, will get you this 1 mark. Now, always remember, even if you go through like 100 different question paper and 100 different marking scheme, IGCSE will surprise you with a whole different question. But the things that remains constant in these particular experiment is the experimental techniques that is involved or you should have when you learn physics. By the end of this course that you have endured, I believe that all of you have acquired these experimental techniques involving the observation and recording and analysis of data. And I believe that you will be able to successfully apply these tips in your examination. All the very best.